Good evening. So proud of myself. I remembered to turn the recorder on. 1 out of 4 classes. That's pretty good, huh? I lost a long-time friend and mentor last night, and we knew it was coming, but still. So I thought maybe we could start with a guided meditation based on Thich Nhat Hanh's breathing in and breathing out series. The first one is about the 5 remembrances in the Theravada tradition. And the second one's about non-self and the skandhas, the 5 heaps that we covered in the first class or second class. So I'll just go through the guided meditation. Just takes a few minutes, and then we'll just sit for a few minutes and I'll ring the bell. Breathing in, I know I will grow old. Breathing out, I know I shall not always be young and healthy. Breathing in, I know I will fall sick. Breathing out, I know I can't escape sickness. Breathing in, I know I will die. Breathing out, I know I can't escape death. Breathing in, I know that one day I will have to abandon all that I cherish today. Breathing out, I know I can't hold on forever to all that I cherish. Breathing in, I know that my actions are the only belongings I can take with me. Breathing out, I know I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. Breathing in, I'm determined to live my days deeply in mindfulness. Breathing out, I see the peace and joy of living mindfully. Breathing in, I vow each day to offer joy to everyone I meet. Breathing out, I vow each day to offer ease to everyone I meet. Breathing in, I am aware of my body. Breathing out, I smile to my body. Breathing in, I am aware this body is not I. Breathing out, I am aware I do not own this body. Breathing in, I am aware of a feeling. Breathing out, I smile at this feeling. Breathing in, I'm aware this feeling is not I. Breathing out, I am aware I do not own this feeling. Breathing in, I am aware of a perception. Breathing out, I smile to this perception. Breathing in, I am aware this perception is not I. Breathing out, I am aware I do not own this perception. Breathing in, I am aware of a mental formation. Breathing out, I smile to this mental formation. Breathing in, I know this mental formation is not I. Breathing out, I am aware I do not own this mental formation. Breathing in, I am aware of consciousness. Breathing out, I smile to consciousness. Breathing in, I am aware consciousness is not I. Breathing out, I am aware I do not own consciousness. Breathing in, I know these 5 aggregates are not me or mine. Breathing out, I smile, knowing these 5 aggregates are not me or mine. Compassion and awareness, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are genuine refuges in the midst of impermanence and interdependence. May we awaken for the benefit of all beings. So I appreciated the questions that were offered last week and some by email. And I kind of, as I went over them, they began to kind of mix and combine in the sense of how I wanted to respond. And I decided they were all in one way or another about skillful means. And that's one of the topics I wanted to cover in this class, and had given up on it by the second or third class, knowing that we couldn't cover everything. But the wisdom of the group brought that topic back. And if we have time, I'll try to talk a little bit about skillful means, where it came from and how it fits into the tradition. But I thought I could respond to the questions first. And if I've mangled your question or misconstrued it, maybe let's go through the questions and my responses, and then we can have a discussion about whatever gets left out or doesn't address what your actual question was. So one question was about how to clarify motivation and how we could keep it from being self-centered. Like, how do we know what a good motivation is? And the way I've come to look at it through my own practice, where my motivations have really shifted over the years. When I started, I I had a sense that I just wanted peace. There was a lot of conflict in my life, not only in my relationships and my work and things, but in my own mind. And I really started practicing just to get a sense of peace. But once I had that, or some semblance of it, as best I could, I felt my motivation shifting. And what I've come up with is that motivations are on a scale. Maybe at the lowest level is impulses. Like most of the time, we don't even know when they arise. We just find ourselves doing something. So on the least conscious level is just the impulses that arise because of our past perceptions and our past actions and all the consequences of those, until we can go through whole day. I can at least go through whole days just being very impulsive. And if you're lucky enough to realize you should examine those, what I've found is that I find a bunch of mixed motives behind that. And again, I don't have much to do with those motives. There are things that are motivating me. Could be fear, could be anger, could be desire, could be, confusion, jealousy, you have it. So motives are maybe a little more conscious than impulses, but they're still coming from out of left field, and they drive me to do things, and sometimes they're in conflict with each other. I have a motive, or I want a motive to be kind, but with people I don't like, I've got these conflicting motives. And then there's, on a little higher level, is aspirations, where I'm starting to form something. I'm starting to realize what I actually want when I'm not in a mood, or when I'm not driven by something from the past. I begin to be able to connect with aspirations. They still seem impossible, far-fetched, beyond my capability, but I'm beginning to be conscious of what I actually want, regardless of what motivates me in a particular moment. I have these aspirations, what I consciously wish for. And then there's intentions. These are aspirations that we've considered, and it's like we've decided, I really do intend to live with awareness and kindness, or I really do intend, it can be on a more mundane level too, I really do intend to find a new line of work or something. But with an intention, you've made a decision. You may not know how, you may not know whether it's how long it'll take, or whether it's even possible, but you have an intention, and you're starting to take steps in that direction. And I think this is where the vows come in. Maybe they start out just as aspirations or just abstractions. Some teacher or tradition hands you a vow and you find yourself reciting it. But a conscious vow is something, not only do I have this aspiration and this intention, and I'm already moving in that direction, but I vow I'm going to keep moving in that direction. Again, we don't know how long it might take, or whether it's even possible. But at the level of vow, it doesn't even matter whether we succeed. Our direction is clear. We're taking steps. We know there's going to be obstacles and delays and side tracks and things, get lost and come back 5 years later. But every time you renew a vow, you're setting out in that direction again. And it doesn't, at that level, it doesn't matter whether you succeed or not. Some teachers will talk about fulfilling vows in this life. Other teachers will emphasize that some vows, some future life. And whether you believe in it or not doesn't matter. They're pointing out the different ways of teaching, and this is one of the skillful means. For some people, they want a practical thing that actually could be accomplished, like an objective or a goal, and they'll know when they've accomplished it. Other people, they want something so big and so noble that they get discouraged from month to month and year to year. So they want to view it as if they have all the time in the world. They could take 15 lifetimes, but still you're moving in that direction. So to answer the question of how do you know, how do you clarify your motivation? We clarify it the same way we do everything in this tradition. We slow down and pay attention, and we look deeply at what's arising in us and what it leads us to do and what the consequences are. And we start to trust our awareness and our aspirations to clarify what we actually want and not just what we're being moved to do by some habit or impulse. And as we gain confidence in that and gain some capacity to stay, grounded when an impulse arises, we don't have to obey it every time. As we gain some capacity and some confidence, then the impulses and motives begin to become aspirations and intentions. In a funny way, we don't choose our impulses, they just come. We don't choose those conflicting motives, they just appear. There's another way, a deeper way, kind of that aspirations and intentions and vows we don't maybe fully choose either, because they get closer to the ground of what we actually are, our Buddha nature of compassion and awareness. And so our personal goals or our personal life is no longer at the center, really. Our life begins to be lived through Buddha nature, awareness and compassion, and the kind of the universal intentions and vows that are often found in the prayers. So if the prayers don't make sense or they seem against what you personally want, there's a few things you can do. One is continue on. Trust that after 2,500 years, there's a reason these prayers are constructed the way they are, and that you're going to grow into understanding them on your own terms and being able to get behind them in a way that preserves your integrity. Another way is to realize that they're all translated, and it doesn't matter whether they're translated into Tibetan or English or French or whatever. Language is language, it's limited. So it is valid to question the wording of a prayer because it's just in a language. And I have played around with the prayers. I'll take a line that doesn't work for me from a traditional prayer, and I'll take another translator's version of that line and I'll stick it in there to see how does that change the way I recite and take refuge in that verse. So it's not the same at all as kind of making things up in a new age sort of way. Take this and that I like and that makes me happy in the moment. This is clarifying your aspirations and intentions and using skillful means to understand the practice in a way that will help you stay moving in the direction you want. There's also another way that just sticking with the prayers or the suggestions of a teacher, assuming that you trust them, etc. But another way that it makes sense to stay with it. I was on a retreat with Ajahn Amaro, English guy who is in the Theravada tradition, the Thai forest tradition. And he was talking about the 257 rules that the Theravada monks live by. And somebody asked him, isn't that kind of inconvenient? Or, isn't it superstitious? Or weren't those rules made up, 2,500 years ago? I mean, why on earth would you have to brush your teeth with your right hand, which is apparently one of the rules? And Ajahn Amaro said, well, it's very interesting. Every time I feel like doing it a different way, every time I want to do it my way, I take the precept as a red flag. It's telling me that my ego thinks it knows even something as simple as how to brush my teeth. So instead of encouraging rebellion or encouraging obedience, he's encouraging the rule acts as a flag for his awareness. He's deepening his practice. If you find yourself obeying or rebelling, you might consider whether those are the only two choices, or whether either of them is the best choice. Maybe there's a way to continue the practice, but find the way that it brings you into alignment, not in a superstitious way, but in a always, compassion, awareness, skillful means. So that's the thing about motivation. And then somebody asked, how do you know what practice is best? And Buddhism is a collection of practices. There isn't one practice. Sometimes people say, oh, Buddhism's the religion of awareness. Well, it's that, and it's a few, dozen other things too. And over that 2,500 years, many groups and many cultures and many eras have, shaped and reshaped and enhanced the entire tradition. And you can quibble with any one, detail in a particular tradition, but as a whole, you have to admire the intelligence and the practicality of it. So Buddhism is this huge framework of different practices. We have the Eightfold Path, which in itself is, covers everything from right speech to right meditation. We have stability and insight. We have compassion and kindness. We have, the paramitas of generosity. We have all the ethical, even within insight and mindfulness itself, we have dozens of different practices, different ways of looking deeply to discover the true nature of experience. You can trust those frameworks. And I know a lot of Christians and Jewish people that are still practicing in the religion they were born into, and still are able to cultivate awareness and compassion with the Buddhist practices. So that's a whole nother topic, whether you can practice multiple religions at once in an intelligent way. But instead of asking, should I be doing shamatha or insight? Should I be doing kindness or compassion? Look at the frameworks. Kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity come in the framework of the four immeasurables. Stability or shamatha and insight or vipassana come as a pair. So you don't practice one or the other. And I think we may have discussed a little bit in the earlier class, they're not even separate, right? There's the stability of awareness and there's the seeing of awareness. So shamatha and vipassana are the same thing. And if you want to skip over them and get to this higher, more profound practice of Mahamudra, well, Mahamudra is the unity of shamatha and vipassana. So trust the frameworks and master, the framework. Don't practice kindness, metta by itself. Practice it in the four immeasurables. Don't just do shamatha. You'll get some calm and stress reduction. It's better than nothing. But it's meant to be practiced with insight. On another level, you may not know what practice is best. Again, I'll speak to myself because I'm such a ridiculous example of it. We often don't know. I often don't know what is in my best interest. I may even have, practiced long enough to have noble aspirations and intentions, but I still may not know what practices are best to dismantle my particular patterns, the most habitual of which I'm probably not even aware of what that pattern is. So this is one reason to work with a teacher and a sangha, because your patterns will rise up in when you relate to other people. One of the ways sangha is supportive is it wakes us up. When we treat people a certain way, when we overlook a certain aspect of what other people need, eventually we hear about it. So rather than self-diagnosing and prescribing a medicine, we rely on the teacher and to a large extent the sangha as well. In the end, of course, the path you take is your own responsibility. You're the one that's going to experience the consequences of your efforts and your actions. And you can't blame a teacher or a group. You can leave the teacher in the group. And there's, of course, many pretty obvious examples of when that might be a good idea, but you can't blame them for the choices you make. You're the principal witness. You better have companion witnesses who are helping you view things from different angles that you can't see. But in the end, it's your responsibility. And as far as that goes, I don't really know, in my experience, how to know whether a practice is any good or not, other than to practice it long enough to begin to see the effects. And you can't judge that practice by what you experience on the cushion. One of the brilliant frameworks that Ken MacLeod came up with in Wake Up to Your Life is purpose, method, effects, and results. It's just stunningly brilliant as a tool for examining your own practice. And he gives the example of jogging. The purpose of jogging is to become fit, to become healthy, right? The method is to put on your shoes and stretch and run and gradually increase your distance, etc. That's the actual method. Just because you have a purpose of getting fit doesn't do any good to pray for it or to wish for it. There's got to be a method to achieve it. The effects are what happens from day to day. You start running, well, some days you're all invigorated and jazzed up and feel strong. Other days you twist your ankle and you feel like you're going to have a heart attack and it just feels terrible. You're tired the next day. So you can't trust the effects from day to day. You have a purpose and you've chosen the practice that's meant to achieve that purpose, say in this case, jogging. And you know how to do it. And now you don't ignore the effects. If you're spraining your ankle, then you might need different shoes or a different, technique or something. But you don't stop because one day you feel good, you think the jogging's worked. And then the next day you stop because it doesn't feel so good. The effects come and go from day to day. And then the results are what actually happens when you do the practice properly for long enough. You do it skillfully, then gradually you get in shape. So you can run this through virtually any Buddhist practice. Let's say shamatha, resting with the breath. Well, what's the purpose of that practice? Resting with the breath is the method, but the purpose is to stabilize your attention. Or you could say the purpose is to interrupt your habitual thoughts and actions. The purpose is to stabilize your attention. The method is to rest with the breath or to focus on a physical object in front of you, whatever the method is. Follow the method exactly as it's taught. The effects from day to day, sometimes you're falling asleep. Sometimes you're thinking. Sometimes you're anything but stable. Sometimes you're full of fear. Sometimes you get very stable and then you see into a pattern and it makes you sick to your stomach. So again, the effects in and out every day. And if you get excited about the pleasant effects and get discouraged by the unpleasant effects, you're not going to last very long. The results eventually are stable awareness. And again, you may not experience it on the cushion. You may experience it in the middle of an argument. Suddenly you're having this argument with somebody for the 10th time, but this time you stay grounded. You say what you intend to say. You see how things are arising. Your attention is stable. You're still angry, but they don't know it. Personally, I found that the more I feel my anger, the less the person I'm angry with feels it. It's when I can't stand it that I'm unloading on somebody else. So often the results are seen in daily life, not on the cushion. Some people struggle with meditation practice their entire life. It's just the cushion practice is very challenging. But they keep it up because they know the effects are not important. They know the results are important and they see the results. So if you've got a copy of Wake Up to Your Life, you can. It appears in several places. One with cultivating attention, which is what Ken is calling shamatha, I think, chapter 3. And the other instance where it uses is in the chapter on the 4 immeasurables. And there he explains it in terms of you're practicing metta, wishing others kindness, but all you feel is irritation. Again, I'm speaking about myself. All you feel is the opposite of the immeasurable. But that's just the daily effect. You're bringing up those patterns that are preventing you from accessing natural awareness. Eventually, you will uncover the immeasurable kindness that's part of your nature. But what it feels like while you practice it on the cushion is, it really varies. It's kind of like side effects with the medicine. If you trust the doctor and you take the medicine, the side effects might be unpleasant, but it might save your life. Another question was, what is the right balance between study, meditation, and action? And this again is a really good question because it is relevant to a bunch of different levels. I remember Michael Conklin once saying, it's okay to read a page or two when you sit down to practice. You can read a page or two to inspire you or to remind you of what the practice is. But after that, you're just delaying practice. So he would always put practice above study. You study in order to clarify and inspire your practice. And that makes sense because the seeing that frees us, the clear seeing or vipassana that actually frees us from our habituated patterns, is not a conceptual. You can understand, like when you look at the 12 links and where it's clear where you have to break it. Conceptually, it's not that complicated. But looking at that and remembering it, even bringing it up in the middle of a pattern, doesn't do it. Vipassana is we call it seeing. It's seeing. Pasana in Sanskrit is seeing too, like with the eyes. But it's not just seeing, it's knowing. The way you know your best friends walking down the street. You don't have to think, you don't have to examine, you see them and you know for sure who that is. That's the kind of seeing. You know where an impulse is going to lead. And so you have the strength and the determination to cut the impulse. On the other hand, we can study in a contemplative way. And that guided meditation of Thich Nhat Hanh's is an example where he's guiding people through the meditation with words. You could say, oh, this is a distraction. I want silence. Well, it's using words to take us deeper into the experience, our actual experience. So when we say, I'm aware of mental formations are not me or mine. Well, if they feel like it, then we don't know yet. And that's why, we keep bringing ourselves back to this fact. And we're stating it as if it's true, and eventually it will become true. Gregory Kramer has a book called Contemplative. I can't remember the second name. It's a little orange booklet. Very good. It's about how to study a text together and how to recite it together and how to deepen the actual experience of meditation through a group reading and study. It's contemplative texts or contemplative. I'll come up with it. So that's a way of just making study not just study. You make study into a contemplation. Contemplation's halfway between study and meditation, we could say. Study is conceptual, meditation is whole body, whole knowing. Contemplation is what bridges the two. So in the Tibetan tradition, we say we study, we contemplate, and then we practice. Well, by practice, they mean meditation. I would say all three are practice. But we study and then we contemplate, compare it to our own experience, check it out. Come and see for yourself, is this true in my experience? And then we just keep meditating and familiarizing ourselves with it until it becomes true all the time. So if we redefine practice not as a formal sitting meditation, but as anything done with a clear intention, clear method, awareness, then study and contemplation and meditation and even daily life become practice. And I don't really see how you can drop out any of those, study, contemplation, meditation, or practice. They all are there on some level. So let's just call all of those practice. And then figure out, what are the differences between them and how do we actually integrate? Still, the question makes sense on an everyday level. How do I know when I'm studying too much, too conceptual? How do I know when I'm not acting enough? Am I calm on my meditation cushion, but I'm arguing with people all day long? Now I need to bring the practice to bear in my actions. Because of course there's no real purpose in studying or meditating if it doesn't change our behavior. The study is interesting, and that's, for 15 years, more than 15 years, that's all I did was study it because I found it really challenging and interesting and informative. But at some point, that study and that meditation it needs to affect our perception and behavior in the rest of our life. Ken MacLeod says meditation is practice unmixed with activity. And daily life is practice mixed with activity. So again, he's saying there's no difference in the intention and the determination and the actualization that we bring to it. On the cushion, we're not doing anything else, so we make it easy to focus. But daily life is also practice. It's just mixed with all the activities that we find ourselves in. So we don't pit meditation against daily life. There's a quote I always liked by Control, who lived in the 19th century, one of the great non-sectarian masters in Tibet. He said, when you study everything under the sun. When you reflect, keep an open mind. When you practice, do one practice and go deep. And then Fred, let's see, what time is it? 7:14. Fred had a question that he emailed me about the relationship between physical and mental blocks. And I'm going to say there isn't a relationship. They are the same thing. Body sensations lead to feelings, lead to emotions and thoughts, lead to impulses and formations and actions. Every pattern we have that causes suffering is both, it's neurological, it's physical and sensory, it's emotional, it affects our thinking, it affects our perception of the world, it affects our behavior. So that one pattern is operating on all those levels. And to interrupt that pattern in shamatha, or to free yourself completely from it in vipassana, it has to be released on all those levels too. It's like trauma. In some ways, you could say Buddhism is an addiction model, right? There's suffering. Suffering arises, it comes from craving, but we can end it. That's the addiction model. It's also a trauma model. Anything that we can't experience, integrate, respond to, gets buried in our nervous system, in our body. Sometimes it's also, in our memories, but often it's, the purpose of the trauma is to kind of block it out. But it gets stored. This is one reason why we practice on the cushion without being interrupted, without being distracted. we can be sitting in a room full of people, but we're having our own experience and we're stable enough and we're glued to the cushion. And so we can experience the memories and the impulses and the fear and everything in a much more stable way. But for that pattern to be interrupted or brought to an end, it needs to be released on the neurological and biochemical and muscular. It's held in all, memory is held in all the cells of the body. So this is another reason the body is the first foundation upon which everything else rests. The emotions and the thoughts and the actions, the impulses, the formations, everything rests on the foundation of the physical body. Literally in practice, but also literally in the formation and storage and dismantling of that pattern. This is another reason why yoga, Tai Chi, walking meditation, work meditation are all helpful, because what may appear as an emotional memory or trauma on the cushion may actually be released in that next work period when you're moving around or when you're doing yoga. I remember doing prostrations in a month-long retreat, and on Ken's advice, I wasn't counting. He told me, you're not allowed to count, just do them. Just do them every day. Do them all day long. So I was doing them, and at some point, kind of halfway through the month, I stood up and I felt like I had lost about 30 pounds. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even know what the pattern was that I had lost, but I had a distinct physical feeling that something was gone. And not in like a spooky or kind of a woo-woo way, but like the sensory experience that something was lighter. So I would really encourage people to practice on a physical level. What that looks like, how you're able to do it, and what it will feel like subjectively, really varies, and it requires the same kind of skill that a mental or emotional practice does. We need people to guide us. We need to take it easy and approach it like we're, completely serious, devote our life to the practice, but not have any sense of how long it's going to take or what it's going to look like. That we set aside. It's so serious, and our awareness is so limited that we don't pretend to know how it's going to play out. But just like there's emotional bypassing, spiritual bypassing, where you try to make everything lovely and kind and full of light, and meanwhile you're avoiding the difficult things in your experience, there's also physical bypassing. And that can even be done on the cushion. One of the reasons I'm leery of heavy-duty concentration practice is because of my own patterns. And I know if I hold myself still, I'm not going to feel much. I can make myself do that, but I just get tenser and tenser personally. I have to move, and part of it is I want to give my nervous system and my muscles and my biochemistry every chance to release the patterns. I may not even be aware of it mentally or emotionally when it happens, but I trust that my body is holding these things in, and I'm inviting it to, participate in the release. Once again, I've talked for an hour. Maybe in the interests of our physical body, we should take a 5 or 8 minute break and then come back, and you can be thinking about discussion. We'll come back and see what you think about what I've offered. It's 7:21, so let's come back at 7:30. Thank you for your patience in listening.
Hey, George,
Yes.
it's Julie. I have a question. I think that you said maybe even in the first meeting of these Thursday nights that karma was momentum. Is that correct?
Well, it has momentum.
Uh-huh. Well, I thought about that a lot, and I've been thinking about it because I found it to be very fresh, and slightly different from, of course, that's not all it is, but thinking of it with some momentum, brought more meaning to cause and effect and that process. And so then last Monday night, I think you were there with Sally.
Yeah.
And there was some conversation about samsara. And I I've been just wondering and looking at whether or not samsara doesn't operate in a very similar way, with momentum. And
Yeah. And once we're born in that hell realm, we have the habits and the momentum of people who are always at war. Yeah. I guess we didn't talk about knots, did we?
Well, this is just a random thought,
Yeah.
and
Well,
because
not,
it grabbed my attention.
Yeah.
You're bringing up this notion of momentum, and I liked it, and so I've just been playing around with that, and I don't.
Go ahead.
That's all. I just, before.
No, I think it's very, it's key. Karma literally means action, but it really means actions and consequence. Or as Ken would prefer it, seed and fruit, because it's not an action and consequence like picking up a rock and dropping it, right? I do an action, well, that's a seed, and whether it bears fruit or not, is unknown. So there's this unknown quality to karma, but there's also the aspect that it becomes habituated patterns. When I don't know what's going on, I get irritated. It's happened 10,000 times since I was a little kid. I've got this apparently lifelong, I just can't stand chaos and not knowing what's going on. So there's this momentum to get irritated. Doesn't mean I can't interrupt it, but it means I do have to, what Control said, samsara has no end. It has no end unless you stop it. So these habituated patterns gather momentum. And unless you interrupt them, they're just going to continue and get stronger. This also operates in the positive. That's why we say the refuge prayers 3 times. You say something 3 times over and over and over again, it starts to, I can't memorize things very easily, but these prayers I end up memorizing without trying because I've said them so many times. So they come to mind.
Yeah.
So good actions get momentum too, with repetition.
Definitely. Also
part of the neurology, right? We get traumatized, car accident or earthquake or whatever. Well, every time there's a loud noise, we have the same trauma until we can figure out how to unwind it. But our nervous systems, myelination and all that in the nervous system. Yeah. Right? Everything we do, everything we say, everything we think gets easier to think the next time.
Right.
And
muscle memory.
And the myelination, the nerves, the neurons get greased with an oily substance. It's like playing the piano or swearing, whatever it is.
Mhm.
Every time you do it, that neuron gets greased so that it's the intelligence of the body. You want to do this, every 5 minutes? Well, we'll figure out how to get that impulse, throughout the nervous system faster. It's a very intelligent system of learning, as long as you're learning something positive.
Right, right. Yeah, it
It
can
also
go either
makes it
way.
very easy to get addicted to negative. Yeah.
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 Well, I don't want to keep you from taking a quick break, and I'm going to run do that
Yeah.
too, but
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Julie.
How are you doing, Nan?
I'm doing good.
How's your, how are your
Missing you.
Yes, likewise. How are your Venezuelans?
They're great. They're here. We have pictures and videos of them. The men have already gotten about $300 worth of work.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, it's really amazing how it
Yeah.
just all came together like silk, how
Yeah.
the sense of,
When I was in college, Nan, my parents lived in Caracas, Venezuela,
oh,
and I spent a lot of time down there. And
okay.
it was just, it's a beautiful country. And it was, in the early 70s when it was the most cosmopolitan, cool place in South America to go. And it's so unfortunate,
Yeah.
what has happened there. But yeah, that's,
They're very young with a 1, 2, and a 3-year-old, and they're, they just couldn't handle it anymore. And
yeah.
so they just made a dash for Mexico and happened upon Shanae, which was, she's like this amazing human being who was just, it was in front of her, so she chose to do it. As long as it's right there, you pick it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been good. I'll send you the letter that went out with the video of them finding
I'd
their
love
new
it.
apartment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Their Spanish is a little bit tough. It's they speak really fast and
Oh,
they yeah, it's its own thing, but
yeah. Yeah, I'm never going to be able to talk with them. I don't know a word.
you don't need to, Nan.
Figure I'll just snag one of their babies and walk off to a
Yeah,
rocking
yeah.
chair, and that'll be the end of it.
That'll be a great help.
George, these are This is a Venezuelan family that has come via one of the women priests at Great Vow,
Oh,
and they're seeking asylum in the United States. And the community just, in about 3 weeks, we had everything for an apartment and all the stuff they needed, and
wonderful.
just flew together. So
That's great.
yeah,
I hear so many horror stories. It's
yeah, it's really, we did this years and years ago with people from the settlement camps in Thailand.
ah,
And unlike these people, they all arrived so sick,
ah,
really terribly physically ill, and
Mm.
just so frightened of life from what they've been through.
Yeah.
So this is amazing to watch. It's different kind of folks
Yeah.
just building a new life.
Yeah. So Julie and I were talking on the break about the momentum of karma and how that's an aspect of it. And another one of the things I had wanted to offer in the course and haven't had time to, you can actually find on my website, if you go to naturalawareness.net and click on, oh, now I've forgotten which section it's in. There is a page called Knots,
Oh,
and it's in resources. If you go to naturalawareness.net and click on resources and then go down to Knots, and it's classic Buddhist terms for different aspects of how karma kind of gets wormed into our system and why it's hard to dislodge. Might be interesting to just look at the different
well,
ways that different traditions have described what they see of what Ken calls habituated patterns, and Michael would probably call kleshas. We often get into like a single term, like it's karma or it's patterns or it's, but the knots thing kind of opens it up and shows the different levels of it. So let's have just discussion about either the questions that we've brought back up again tonight, or about anything else. We've just got an hour left. So whatever you want to talk about would be interesting to me. Or we could do some practice. Chris suggested last week, didn't quite do it in a form of a question, and it's more of a practice anyway, a kind of insight practice that he and I have shared over the years. So we could do an insight practice.
yeah.
Okay.
But there's also part of me wants kind of like I wanted the class to be a kind of a survey. Of course, can't cover everything. Buddhism is too big a tradition, but I also wanted, not to have it be insight or not to have it be a certain piece of the tradition, but to kind of cover everything. So. But maybe we could just we could play around with this insight practice for a couple minutes. Imagine something This is another contemplative one. So rather than just sit in silence, which I would also enjoy, but let's do a little contemplation on the insight level. Imagine something. Do you know what a jackalope is? Some people do. It's a rabbit that has huge deer horns, right? And you see them sometimes on postcards, these postcards from the Old West, and there'll be a cowboy on top, and he's riding this giant hare, one of those big desert hares, and it's always got these big deer antlers on it. So imagine a jackalope. It's a completely fictional thing, but you can see it. If you know what a jackalope is, you can see it. You have a visual image of it. And a couple people kind of chuckled. So right away, the formations, the emotional and mental formations, right? That image triggers some humor and some memory about where you've seen it. If you don't know a jackalope, think of the Eiffel Tower. I've never been there. For all I know, it doesn't look anything like what the pictures are, but I think I know what it looks like, right? I can bring up an image of the Eiffel Tower, though I've never seen it. Where is that image? What is that image in my mind? What's the relationship between the mental image I have of the Eiffel Tower and the actual tower? In my case, the mental image is probably pretty fuzzy. I think I know what it looks like, but I couldn't tell you. I know it's got complex, structure to it, but I couldn't tell you what that pattern is. But I can concoct a mental image, right? I have an experience of the Eiffel Tower, but it doesn't actually correspond to the tower itself. And the jackalope, or my mother thought Sherlock Holmes was real. I loved the Sherlock Holmes stories when I was a kid. And I discovered that, it was fiction. My mother said, no, he was the first detective. So she knew his history. She knew what he looked like. And she had, associations that went along with it. But it didn't correspond to a reality, right? Think of someone familiar to you. You can just instantly, their face comes to mind, but they have died, right? Again, there's no actual person in this world anymore. But you can experience their mind. I can hear and feel my father's voice, though he's been dead for 40 years. When we have a mental image, what is that? We say, oh, well, it's a memory. It's a remembered image. Yeah, but what is that actual experience? Why, when I think of my father, do I see him, hear him, feel his presence? I have a whole, of course, it's not as vivid as the actual experiences I had when I was young, but I have a whole range of multi-sensory experience when someone brings up my father's name. What is the nature of that experience? That I can just make it arise. And what would be the difference? I have this neighbor who's kind of pesky, kind of noisy, kind of messy, kind of gets in arguments with other people. All I have to do is think of him. Now, he's a real person. He lives a few doors down, and I actually, interact with him on occasion. But again, I have this whole universe of association and memory that arises, and how fast that arises. If I see him down the street, he's 4 doors away, and I don't even have to wave at him, much less interact with him. But right away, that dislike and that bias comes up. So what does that mental formation that I create, or I carry and store and release, what does that have to do with that guy? Or now regard something that's actually in front of you, a physical object in front of you. It could be the keyboard of your computer. It could be your glass of water on the table, but something that's actually in front of you right now, a visual object. You could look at it, you could pick it up and feel it. So you have a visual as well as, sensory experience. And we know this thing is actually here, right? We know it's empty, it's impermanent, depends on, causes and conditions. If I take this metal bell and I put it in a fire, it's going to melt. So it's not a solid and permanent, but it's an actual object in my environment. But when I look at it, what is the actual experience? It's just a mental image, or sensory image. It's a little cold because it's metal. It's smooth because it's polished. I can describe it. But when I look at that bell, what's the experience I'm having? Is it me here seeing that bell? That's what we would say, right? I mean, that's common. Ken used to pick up a book. Well, he wouldn't say that. He would just, what is this? And somebody would say, book. And he'd say, well, that's a word. What is this? What do you see? Well, I see a book. Well, no. What do you actually see? Square, dark on top, light underneath. At least in the screen, it's a little shiny. How about now? What do you see now? Oh, it's the same book. Well, it's not the same experience. When I say, what is this? What is your actual experience? How far back can you take it until you're actually describing what you are experiencing? And Chris and I have done this. Chris lives in the woods in North Carolina. So he's often on his porch when we talk. He's surrounded by trees. So I say, look at a tree. Well, what is that? Well, of course, conventionally, it's a tree. But what's the experience? If the tree's over there, how is the mental image in your mind? Is it in your head? Or is it in your eyes? And then pick a habit that you have, not the worst one in the world, but pick a habit you have that you just as soon be rid of. Conjure it up, feel it a little bit. Maybe you can even work yourself into feeling the impulse that it wants you to enact. What is that experience? the actual experience. Not what you think about it, not how you interpret it, not what your spouse thinks about it, but what is the actual experience when it arises? Before you describe it, even before you have the dislike or like or the mix, I like this habit, but I also hate this habit. Even before that, take the habit back down to its first arising, not in history, but the arising right now. What is that experience? What is it? Where is it? How does it arise? Does it move? Do you feel it in your body? Does it have a shape? Does it start in one place and go to another? Can you parse out the behavior from the impulses and mental formations, from the name you give it, from the like and dislike you have for it, back to the arising of the sensation itself that triggers all that other stuff? That's one way of doing insight practice. And we play around with neutral objects or simple objects or beautiful objects like a tree. And we get used to re-examining what we're actually is arising in our six senses. But then we can turn it toward the patterns that cause suffering or the resistance to things that we want to do. We have aspirations or intentions to do, and something in our experience blocks. So we look like that in order to understand its actual nature. So rather than trying to get in there and dismantle the pattern, just first examine it over and over and over again until you are sure you know what that is and how it works and how it arises. You know everything about it. Like I don't know about that neighbor that I dislike, and I haven't gotten around to making friends with him or getting to know him, right? So this thing keeps operating in me. How many times do you think we've looked at a tree together, Chris?
Lots of times that tree's not there anymore, though.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You had to cut it down?
Yeah.
Well, so there you go. Now you have that memory and that experience, but the object has moved on.
Exactly right. And I always knew it wasn't going to last forever.
Yeah.
I'll send you a picture of the stump. The stump's rotting it back now. So
good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I've looked into my impulses and habits of frustration and anger until I've decided there's actually about 20 different ones. It's a whole family. in a way, it's just a way of, it's nothing magical. I mean, it's kind of weird, especially when you can conjure up an experience of Sherlock Holmes or something that never existed. But in some ways, it's just simply paying attention to the experience until you understand that it's not this one, the habit. It's this cluster, those heaps again,
Mhm.
that get triggered, that associate with each other, that compound each other, how fast they are.
George, I have a question about those images that arise. Buddhists have a lot of numbers and ideas about things. It seems like I remember someone told me one time that the experience you might have in 1 second, it flicks on and off, 100 times maybe in 1 second. And so there's a lot of space between those arisings, even within 1 second. Any thoughts about that?
Well, we could just break it into 12 for simplicity's sake, the 12 links of dependent arising in a way are a one moment of experience. My pesky neighbor blocks my driveway. I walk out, take one look at it, and I'm in the hell realm arguing with him. Boom. There is space only if we stop the construction project that we always have going on. The formations. They're called formations because we form them, not quite consciously or intentionally, but it's a construction in our mind that's triggered by a visual image or a whiff of a scent of something. We construct that world instantaneously. So this is the challenge. How do we get inside that experience so that we can see the sequence, see how it works, not why, but how it actually works, and how we might cut that cycle that only takes 1 minute I'm all happy and the next minute I'm in the hell realm. So how do we this is the practice, to stabilize your awareness, to slow down the construction so that you can actually see and know the nature of what's arising. And how long it takes, what's the right technique, how do you know, where do you learn, the right kind of practice that will unlock one of your patterns. If it was all, by the book, we'd all be enlightened by now. But these things are buried deep. Sometimes I think it's how inheritance from our family, jumps. You could be the first alcoholic in 3 generations in your family. You just didn't know that your great grandfather was a famous, drunk. It skips generations. It gets triggered by something, some kind of, trauma or incident. Thich Nhat Hanh says we carry all human experience, not just all of our experiences in this life, but all experiences that have ever happened to humans. Almost similar to Carl Jung's, collective unconscious. We have all those seeds in us, and all it takes is the right conditions for them to sprout. So some of these habits and biases we're well aware of, and others are just latent. That's one of the knots, is the latent tendencies that we're completely unconscious of, and why ethics and careful behavior is so important, because anything can get us into a situation very quickly that's going to, if we water the wrong seeds. This is how karma is actually seed and fruit rather than action and consequence. Not like stepping on the gas pedal and your car goes. It's more like you've got acorn seeds. Given the right water and sunlight and temperature, you're going to have an oak tree. You're not going to have an elm tree. It's an acorn, so you're going to have an oak tree. So that acorn has the momentum of its karma, but it requires the conditions for it to manifest. But it manifests according to its kind. Anger creates enemies. Kindness creates friends. Awareness cuts the momentum of patterns.
George, there's another aspect of that. Sometimes you have, I can't remember who wrote the book, The Iron Cow of Zen, but he made the comment at one point that the Nazi Holocaust could have happened in any country in the world. And so there's not just individual genetics. It seems like sometimes there's a group dynamic that takes over. Any comment?
Well, yeah, look at America.
Yeah, okay.
or Russia or anywhere else. It's not even a thing of judging. It's my karma is, it's everything I've done that makes those things easier to do. It's the time I was born. I grew up in the 60s, so I've got a bit of the hippie in me. I was born in the Midwest, so I've got Midwestern culture, and people still laugh at my accent sometimes. I've got my family history, my mother's family and my father's family, both the ones I knew and actually had a connection with by relating to them, but I also all the way back. I was lucky enough to know one great grandmother, but I didn't know her husband and I didn't know her mother. But still, the genetics, the actual genetics, but also the culture of my family's going back. And then there's America, and then there's all of those layered and layered. So we can't figure it out. The Buddha said, don't try to figure karma out, you'll go insane. But he said, observe what you do, observe the results, look at your actual experience, not what your stories are telling you. That's part of your experience, but it's not the whole. Act on your karma, trust that kindness leads to happiness and anger leads to unhappiness, but test it, and then trust that karma is not just chaos, that there's a system here. We are not in control, but we're responsible. So how do we live, given the fact that both are true?
I take some comfort in Lojong slogan about seeing dharmas as dreams. That's not to say that conventional reality isn't real, but that maybe we take it literally as opposed to seriously. That's my latest.
Yeah.
I mean, and it gets easier all the time, sadly. Balloons in the sky over Montana. Boy, that I was like, okay, that's a dream. You know, that whole notion that we reify everything. And if that's our main practice, that's what we're doing all the time.
That's what we'll get.
And so the notion that you could be either mindful or mindless, you're one or the other. And lately, that's been a big wake-up call for me. I want to believe my mindfulness practice is strong, but then I ask myself a couple times a day, am I being mindful or am I being mindless? And unfortunately, the answer is mindless, a whole lot more than I thought it might be.
Well, yeah, it's kind of horrifying when you start down this this path. But Michael said, he said something like, we are all so much on autopilot that if someone is 10% aware, we regard them as a saint. So that's kind of the horrifying aspect. On the other hand, when we start to see our impulses actually operate, never mind that we can't stop them, but when we see how we obey them, they arise and we obey, and how we have mixed motives, and we're partly mindful and partly not. And we see how we can start to form aspirations and intentions. That's the good part. It's very possible to do. And I personally, and quite a few people I knew in the old days, I think their lives would be vastly different if they hadn't started cultivating awareness and compassion. Don't have to be a saint, although Michael said that was, in his eyes, that was the only thing worth being, but in my case, hopeless. But I have a lot of confidence.
Well, I take some confidence in the fact that even though before I became a serious practitioner, I was off the mark a whole lot, I began to see that I didn't have to untie or undo all those knots I'd previously created in my life. Once I could see what I was doing, I started just not doing that thing again and letting go of all the ones that I had done in the past. And when you brought up Ajahn Amro, one of my favorite quotes is his teacher, Ajahn Chah, who would say that in all his experience, 50 to 70% of the practitioners, the students he had, kept doing the same old thing and knew it and still couldn't let go. And so those were his two favorite words for everything. And Ajahn Amro said he'd make them all crazy because whatever they asked him, he would say, let go. And I guess that gave me some confidence because I don't know, my peasant upbringing made me feel guilty about the things I'd done in the past, and the notion that once I had insight, I could let go and begin to see things as they actually were from there. You know, it didn't seem impossible.
And that was one of the Buddha's, assurances. He said, if this was not possible, if this practice and training was not possible, I wouldn't ask you to do it. We don't have to get rid of all our patterns, maybe not possible. The aspiration is good, but in the mindfulness of breathing sutta, which is one of the only two what you could call meditation manuals from the Theravada tradition that give actual instructions. After paying attention to body, feelings, mind, and mental events and phenomena, at the end of the steps, it says, I see the fading of craving. I see that these impulses, the desire to carry out these impulses is fading. And I see it's possible to live without that habit. And the last step is literally, I toss it back. It's not even a letting go, like get out of here. It's I toss it back. It's worthless. What I was craving is not a genuine cause of happiness. Now that I've seen that, I can renounce what I craved, because all I'm renouncing is the cause of unhappiness, and I toss it back. It's like in Thai, it's like literally, a piece of garbage. I throw it away. And of course, you have to practice the four foundations of mindfulness, of breathing a million times. But it's possible. And something in us knows that's what keeps us coming back. If only because we're already a bit disillusioned with that pattern. We might not be able to stop it, but it's no longer exactly satisfying. And so we know it's worth becoming fully disillusioned so that we can just toss it away. Yeah, in the awareness of breathing sutta, it actually you see the attachment fades in the sense of or the craving fades in the sense of becoming increasingly disillusioned, recognizing that it's not a cause of happiness. And then the promise is that you see the attachment cease. That's the actual in the manual. Not sure what Ajahn Chah referred to as letting go, but the disillusionment comes, and then with the craving, And then the cessation of attachment, you see it happen. You are no longer attached. You didn't do anything. But the scene that frees happens, and you see that the attachment is gone. And that's when you can throw it away. Because the attachment has already ceased. You saw it cease. Maybe that when we keep trying to push things away or throw them away or let go of them, get rid of them, maybe the stickiness gets worse. The kind of a premature letting go. Whereas the practice is compassion and awareness. And how do we trust that? That that's all it takes. We got to do a bunch of things to, to practice those. But Ken's language in Wake Up to Your Life is that we dismantle habitual patterns. But in my experience, that that word dismantle makes it sound like I could go out and take my truck apart. In my experience, it's more like I sit with it with compassion and awareness until I see it fall apart. It's awfully tempting to get in there and try to pull it apart, pry it apart, smash it. But in the case of my stubborn practice, it's more like I see it fall apart.
Theravadas will talk about self-liberating, which was something that at first I thought, oh boy, that's good. How do I make that happen?
Yeah.
But that's the whole point. You don't. And so the first time that I did see that, I found that was a breakthrough. I mean, I was at that stage where I felt some anger coming up, and I could at least, catch myself and bite my tongue. I still was angry, but I didn't say what I was going to say. And then down the road, I had that same experience with that same person, and the anger dissipated. And I didn't do anything, or at least not consciously. And I suddenly had this feeling, wow, it can, if you keep looking at it, if you don't turn away, there is this sense of it's lets go on its own. Not always, but at least I started to see it.
And it brings back the question of how do we know maybe what to practice, which practice to do, but at least as important is how we do it. In my case, it took some kindness and compassion. I had the insight, the analytical, insight, but that didn't release much. Somehow I found my way into enough kindness and compassion that it started to dissolve things. And I think for each of us, it may, kindness and compassion always a good idea, but for each of us, that may be the art of how we find the practice that frees us. We know it's compassion and awareness. It's the seeing that frees. It's the stability to tolerate long enough to see. But the question is how do we do that? How does each of us do that in our own experience in our own life? And that's a very that's a mysterious question.
Well, I think it helps to be a curious person. I mean, I feel like my number one tool is investigation. You know, and I don't mean that in a cognitive sense so much as in a, sort of like what just happened in my body, and what does that mean? Um,
Yeah,
I mean, I think going slow has something to do with it too. When I started slowing down, which is, I think, also connected to if you can have a regular meditation practice, you get a sense of how to slow your own mind. And then investigation again feels more possible. Because otherwise, things are happening so quickly. It's, I mean, you can try and recreate a situation and sort of investigate it that way.
Ujjayi Rinpoche, one of the Nyingma masters of the 20th century, has a verse that goes, those with faith can take refuge, those with compassion can have bodhicitta, those with wisdom can gain realization, those with devotion can experience blessings. And for me, that kind of shows, some of the range. For me, awareness and insight was cognitive. It was basically a mental, I'm going to figure this out. And it took me a ways because it was maybe my strength, but it's my weaknesses that were holding patterns in place. And that took a different kind of effort and a different kind of sense of what was working and what wasn't. And I think it's the question we talked earlier about staying in touch with your suffering. And this is another aspect of that. If you lose track of your weaknesses and your suffering, then you're going to be playing to your strengths, and you're probably going to get more of what you've already got. And another aspect of trusting a teacher, not every teacher is suitable for every student, but I think you've got to find one that can recognize your strengths and weaknesses and help you find a way to use those. And throwing your patterns in your face or trying to make you do something with great discipline and energy, it doesn't usually work. It's got to be somebody who's got the art of seeing what you've got going on and being willing and able, to work with you in a way that works for you and not as just a patterned thing. there are gentle teachers and there are fierce teachers and there are intimate teachers and there are aloof teachers. And I think you can learn something from each of them. But which one is going to be able to transmit the heart practice to you that really, is the key to your being able to stay on the path. That's I think that's part of why we call it, blessings or energy. We don't know how that works. Maybe some kind of karmic connection or something. But I'm really grateful to all my teachers. And the older I get, the more I realize that the different teachers gave me very different things. They were not at all, they didn't teach the same way. My relationship wasn't the same in each case. And they certainly didn't teach me the same things. But somebody stubborn like me needs cross training. It's the only thing that that started to loosen things up. And I still learn things after they're gone. I was probably 15 or 16, and my family had gone down to Chicago. We were spending the weekend in Chicago, and somehow I got away from my family, and I was walking down the street by myself, and I ran into the Chicago Buddhist temple, which was a Japanese Jodo Shinshu temple, probably 75 years old, the temple. And like a church in those days, the door was just unlocked. So I walked in and there was nobody there. And they had set it up, the Japanese were interned during World War II. And when they came out, they set up their temples to look just like churches with wooden pews, and a big fancy altar in front. And they, instead of calling them temples, they called them churches because of what they'd been through. They wanted to blend in. So I walk into this church and I'm walking down the pews, and boys, it reminded me of growing up Episcopalian. And I walked into the back, and in the back, the kitchen office area, there's a little old Japanese guy sitting at a table opening envelopes, opening his mail. And he just looked at me and he smiled and he said, come sit down. What are you here for? And I'm going, I don't know, just interested. And he was sitting there opening the envelopes with a letter opener. And the way he picked up the envelope and opened it, and the way he pulled it out and unfolded it and looked at it, while I'm just, dumb kids just sitting there, and he's just opening his mail. And there was something that stuck with me. I had no idea what, mindfulness or any of the rest. I don't even remember the conversation. We talked a little while, and he gave me a few books that I've still got on my shelf. And Gyome Kubose. And he died not too long after that. His son is now the minister, they call him, at the temple. His son took over. But I can remember that, I was only there a little while. And there was nobody else there. But he taught me something I can't, other than telling you that story, I can't even articulate what it was that he taught me. something about paying attention and caring, even caring about this envelope, caring about what was in the letter, something like that. And now that my parents are gone, I don't go back to the Midwest very often, but I kind of feel like I should make an excuse to go through Chicago and go visit his son. If only just to tell him that I still remember his father.
George,
Yes.
George, it sounds like he was not the least bit surprised that you showed up. He was unflapped.
Yeah, that's for sure. He
I
didn't.
love that story.
He didn't seem surprised to see me walk in. He did ask me why I had come, but when I said I didn't know and I was interested, he just told me a little bit and handed me a couple little books, and that was that. So it was very simple. Now, of course, I wish I'd gone back and studied with him, but oh, well.
Isn't it interesting how just a few moments can just, where maybe apparently nothing happened, but that those few moments can be so big and last your whole life. I love that.
It was more than 50 years ago.
Mhm.
Something that lasted 20 minutes or something. Or maybe,
Dreamlike.
I don't know. Yeah. And it makes me want to pay attention to every encounter I have. Not that everyone is going to be profound and I'll remember 50 years later, but realizing what, what's possible or what's potentially at stake for good or ill. I have other experiences of growing up that were not so good. And in just a year or two, with a particular relative, set in place patterns in me that I'm still trying to toss away. So just something that doesn't last very long in the event can last your lifetime. And that it doesn't scare me, but it sure makes me want to pay attention. And this story that Nan was telling about, the refugees coming to this country and they're sick and they don't have any money and they don't have anywhere to live. And they met a community that has got them into housing and it is feeding them. And it's like a miracle, probably what was offered to them, food and an apartment, not a big deal, but it's transformed some lives in a matter of days, and it's certainly going to make those adults the rest of their life different. But think about the kids too. Just stunning, the consequences of how events unfold and what part we can realistically or hopefully have some influence, since we're clearly not in charge. Some people say that you could make your whole practice could be aspirations. You wouldn't have to do any other practice. The Jodo Shinshu Buddhists don't even meditate. They sing songs They do very short chanting, not any kind of, training attention chanting. They express gratitude. They have community. They feed each other and take care of each other. One big family. But they don't meditate. And they're some of the most serious and what you say, realized practitioners I know of, like on the behavioral level. And that was Shinran's goal. He didn't like the academic and the government and the big organizations of his day in Japan. And he wanted a practice that was accessible to fishermen and farmers and the vast majority of the people in Japan back in whatever it was, 1200s. So he said, you don't have to meditate. You don't have to have discipline. You don't have to build concentration. Well, sharing the Dharma is just about the most fun thing I ever do. So I'm reluctant to stop. Lama Lekshi sent me an email. She said, the last class is on the 26th, right? And I said, no, it's tonight. And then I was thinking, well, I wish there were a few more classes.
Do some more classes, George.
Yeah. Well, I promised her I'd help teach the mind training class that starts in just a couple of weeks. It's very, very clear that Decaling has so many things going on, visiting teachers and things, that we don't want to spread it too thin. This, like, all of the things are worth doing. And as a newcomer, to the scene, I don't want to set up a bunch of things on my own. Not because I wouldn't enjoy it, but Lama Lekshi has quite a schedule for 2023. And what she's got on the website is a tip of the iceberg. It's just kind of...
Now we're really in trouble.
Yeah.
She said, no, you can do it in 4 classes. Just cover the whole tradition in 4 classes. That's all you get. What Lama Lekshi says, I do. She is such a dear friend. She's about the first friend I made at KCC because she's so darn friendly.
Big heart.
Yeah. And a lot of skills, a lot of good common sense and skills. So,
Well, thank you.
welcome.
And we're glad to have you.
Thank you all. I'm glad you came. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been very encouraging, George. Thank you.
Yes, and if a few of the questions I couldn't quite see how to weave into what we covered, and I didn't want to bring up whole layers of new things. So those of you who have questions, just email me. We can have a meeting. I'm happy to do that. Most of the teaching I do actually is one-on-one, and so if there's something you didn't bring up, there wasn't time, or you did bring it up and I kind of glossed over it, don't feel free to, do feel free to reach out and we can have conversation. Let's do a little dedication of the time and effort that we've put in. We should appreciate it. Whether we got anything out of it or we're not sure we did, that's one of the effects. Doesn't matter. The results are for sure. And any results we have experienced now or in the future might come along later. We dedicate all of that. Benefit of all. By the force of inspiration from the unfailing three gems, that's the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and the truth of our taking universal responsibility, may the precious Buddhist teachings flow and flourish in all lands throughout the length and breadth of the West. For all people living here together with our near ones who engage in the teachings with confidence and respect, may all hindrances to their pure Dharma practice disperse, and an excellent network of favorable conditions grow like the waxing moon. The world arises out of confusion, greed, and aggression, and other forms of suffering arise from that. May we be willing to recognize and feel suffering in order to relieve that same suffering in others. What we see and feel is vivid, yet it is insubstantial, like the appearance of a rainbow in the sky. The world is open and spacious, and we can feel a sense of belonging, of love, and of joy. All beings are essentially free and pure. May we be willing to share that joy with others. Thank you all for participating. And I hope to see you again soon, one way or another. Maybe even in person.
Thanks for letting me join in, George. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Everybody's always welcome in anything I teach. I don't care what tradition or how long you've been practicing or any of that. It's but yes,
Well, you might see me again.
yeah. Well, I'm glad you found me through Jeff and Gail. So good.
Yeah,
Okay.
me
Thanks,
too.
George.
Take care, everyone.
Good night, and thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
So much to learn still.